Everyone out there. This is Rachel and Matt coming to you from Melbourne, Australia, still in lockdown, unfortunately. And thank you for joining us for another episode of When Movies Were Good. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I'm good. All the better to be podcasting with you, my dear.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's we still have to do the show remotely. We still do it over Skype. I think there's a few issues on my end with the internet just from where I access it from. So as always in advance, we apologise. We look forward to when we can get back to doing a pure audio stream. It sounds a lot better. It works a lot better. So we appreciate your patience. We are doing a Gary Cooper double, a discussion about some Gary Cooper films that are very well known to all classic movie audiences. We're doing 1952's High Noon and the 1956 Friendly Persuasion, which stars not only Gary Cooper, but one of my favourite people of all time, Anthony Perkins. So we normally just start by, I think the audience is very familiar with Gary Cooper. He really is one of the giants of American cinema, of American classic cinema. He was someone like most classic movie actors, had different incarnations, doing different types of jobs before winding up in the movie business in the 1920s. And he started in sort of silent pictures, pre-code, and then just went on for pretty much the rest of his life right up until he died as someone that made a lot of films and is highly loved, highly regarded, and highly remembered. So these are two of his most well-known films. So did you enjoy this double this week, Matt, or?
I did. So I'd seen High Noon a while back, and so I enjoyed seeing it again because it is an unusual film in that it's edited in almost real time, and they have quite similar qualities because they have hints of the qualities that you associate with Western movies, but they're not really Westerns, and not that it's necessarily the key focus, I think, but they seem to look at a bit of sort of the Quaker ideology, although it's not really about the Quaker religion. It's more a case of putting pacifism against pro-war elements, and so creating these kind of adaptable storylines. And I thought they were quite absorbing.
Yeah, I didn't actually realise there were a few things that the films had in common, some of the themes in the films. So if we start with 1952's High Noon, so the basic plot of the film is that Marshall Will Kane, played by Gary Cooper, is about to leave his small town in New Mexico with his new wife and younger wife, Amy, played by Grace Kelly. So the local bad guy, Frank Miller, is coming back to the town to exact his revenge. And as members of the town seem to take the easy way out, after much confrontation with Gary Cooper and the rest of the town, Kane ultimately has to face Miller and his henchmen alone. So that's kind of the basic plot of the film. So that leads us to what High Noon is, because that's the time when Miller is actually going to be in the town and this confrontation is going to take place. So directed by Fred Brennan, who did From Here to Eternity, as well as many other well-known films, starring Gary Cooper, Grace Kelly, a young Lloyd Bridges, who I didn't realise was in the film, Lee Van Cleef, who I didn't realise was in this film, who didn't actually speak any lines, and Lon Chaney Jr. So there was a really interesting mix of people in there. And it was by Carl Foreman, who had a lot of writing credits to his history, but he was also someone that was targeted in the House of American activities during that period where the communism scare was going on in the 1950s. And both of these films had a little bit to do with that due to the writers that worked on them, because they were targeted by this commission. So, Matt, I was reading that some people didn't want to be involved with this because other people were thought to take this role on other than Gary Cooper. Charlton Heston and a few other people apparently had turned the role down or had looked at doing the role, but they didn't want to do it because of perhaps what it was, the allegory of it being something to do with duty and desire, but also to do with them taking on the enemy, which a lot of people thought was to do with this group of people that were targeting the communists, so to speak. So what do you think about the storyline of High Noon? Did you like it? Was it your cup of tea?
Well, I thought it was I had a little trouble putting it together in my mind the associations of the allegory to do with McCarthyism. When you compare other stories like The Crucible, which were also allegories of the McCarthy period, you can find the association much more readily. But definitely, I loved how tight the storyline. It sort of didn't linger. It really pushed forward with the rapid crises that a man would have in gaining help like that for a dangerous cause. And even though it's not a typical Western in terms of like lots of major shootouts and confrontations with in open fields, you do get an idea of how this was a time when you couldn't rely on a big local police force to always be taking care of everything. There was a much more hands-on approach to law enforcement. And even though we know well, especially now, that a lot of the Wild West has been mythologized in terms of what it was like, one thing that you could be sure of is that it was you could rely on a government far less for your own protection.
Yeah, that's right, because essentially there was the one lawman in town, and I think the way they had it set up in those days was that he had deputies who would sort of volunteer their position, so to speak, when he needed them. And in this story, no one would volunteer once they sort of realised that it perhaps might turn into be a bloodbath. What did you think of Grace Kelly in this film? I just thought she was either he was too old or she was too young. Apparently in the original book or storyline, he's supposed to be about 30 years old, the Will Kane. But of course, Gary Cooper was in his early 50s at that point. So either they needed to perhaps maybe have a little thing in the storyline at the start at their marriage, because the show, I was reading that in the real time, as you said, the film period, it's 85 minutes long.
Yeah.
But the film period is slightly longer. It's about 10:30 a.m. to about 12:15. So it is sort of a sequence of events shot fairly closely in real time, but the real period was just a little bit longer than that. So yeah, because what a wedding day. I mean, you know, you sort of wake up in the morning, get married, and then all hell breaks loose.
But it kind of seems like you're not wasting time, though.
What's that? Sorry?
It kind of means like you're not wasting time, though. I mean, you get the lovey-dovey stuff out of the way. You get to the part straight away where she's literally saying, "Okay, we've just got married, but I'll abandon you anyway if you try and shoot or try and defend your township." Yeah,
that's right. I'm not so sure I was really into that part of the storyline, but I did like the whole the clock ticking and getting towards high noon and building up the drama that way, and him going to the various members of the town, and there were petty squabbles about other things that happened. So I really like that element, really like the running time. A shorter movie is a bit more what I'm interested in. I just thought Grace Kelly was just a bit too young. Maybe it would have been good to have, it was their second marriage. Maybe both of them were widowers.
But so then back then people did get married ridiculously young.
They did. I just think because Gary Cooper was 50 and he kind of looked around 50, and she kind of looked around her early 20s. She was. It just was too much for me. I don't know whether if they could have if they were really, I don't know, either maybe go for someone a bit younger or a bit of an older actress and explain that perhaps both of them were marrying for the second time as they were widowers or something. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Well, this is still like Jimmy Stewart in Vertigo when he was quite older to his leading lady, and this was a time when I think they still had the remnants of the star system, and quite often for a director and the producers, it would mean more to them to have a big name like Gary Cooper or Jimmy Stewart or Cary Grant as the leading male, and they have to play that sort of boy meets girl narrative, even if it doesn't quite match logically with age. And like you can get away with that more in operas. You can have Placido Domingo play a 70-year-old, play a lover in his 70s, but you can't get away with that so much when you're up close to them with a 35mm lens.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I always thought that watching Vertigo, I just thought James Stewart just seemed far too old for Kim Novak for them to be playing in a sort of romantic sense opposite each other. I felt that about Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint as well.
Well, you know that in Vertigo. Well, you know that in Vertigo, actually, Hitchcock took to his gravest secret, which Francois Truffaut, the French film critic he did a major interview with, only said after Hitchcock died that in secret he did blame that Vertigo. It was only a moderate success at the box office at the time, and he blamed a lot of that on how old Jimmy Stewart looked.
Yeah, I
mind you, he did cast him in the first place.
Yeah, he did, and yeah, and you're right about that. And even now, sometimes you see a film and the actor's still a fair bit older than the woman and all the rest of it. So not so much anymore. But for me, it just kind of took it away. But I did like the other people in the film. The film was very tight. I loved the musical entrance to the film. What was the name of the song? Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, which apparently that became quite a well-known pop song at the time as well. Really loved all that sort of stuff. I was a bit disappointed with the end of the film. I just was a bit corny, but it is what it is. It worked for what it was trying to do. So I did like the film. I didn't love it, but I liked the pace of the film. I liked the idea of the film. It's just some elements didn't come together for me. What was your ultimate thoughts on it?
Perhaps the main thing I had an issue with, and this might be because I recently edited a short film for a competition, so perhaps because I've just been spending so much at a computer editing my own little film, I've become sensitive to it. But I found a few sections throughout the film, the editing was a bit rough, and it's they'd sort of cut over a bit too fast from a actor moving and so forth. And this is ironic because it actually won an Oscar for its editing.
Yeah.
And my guess is that was probably more for the editing in the intense scenes in the bar and the fight, and not so much some of the more out of sync spots that I noticed in the beginning and middle. Like you said, the ending, it seemed a bit strange that Kelly suddenly does pull the trigger, and like the plot needed that to happen, but I feel like they could have built up better to it. It is very narrowly cut, so I don't know if maybe it was perhaps envisioned to be a bit longer with some of those details filled out. It did give the vibe that somebody was probably pressuring for it to be edited down to the bare bone.
Yeah, and I think I was also researching that there was a few issues with the cinematography as well, with the black and white, the use of probably things more that you would understand than me, but there was some controversies on the film. So I think the editing and the cinematography as well, but ultimately the audience liked it. Gary Cooper won an Academy Award for it. And it's that real archetypal hero going up against it. So, I mean, for that alone, it's an entertaining film to watch. I think everyone who was in it did what they could. I think it was more just Kelly and Cooper. I think the age difference was a bit much there. I would have liked to have either seen him paired up maybe with a widower who was a bit older with him, or maybe just had cast the role to a younger person. But then again, I can't really imagine after seeing it anyone else but Gary Cooper doing that role.
It was so weird seeing Grace Kelly appear so far back in the credits. I mean, like, I think they went through 2 or 3 pages of names before they got to her. I'm like, wow, this was really early for her.
Yeah,
she's not in big letters at the front.
Yeah, that was, I think, her first film. She was sort of discovered while she was working on Broadway. And she'd come from quite a well-to-do family and everything. So I guess her being an actress, I'll have to sort of reread that.
She was quite a lucky girl.
Yeah, she was. She was, whether she made the right decision going over into the royal family of Monaco is another story. But, for the films that she did make, she was really the epitome of the era of the classic, cool, beautiful blondes. Obviously, Alfred Hitchcock loved her. But now that we come to think of that, I actually think her and Ray Milland as well. I know, obviously what happened off the set with them but that, again, he seemed a little bit old for her as well. I mean, wouldn't have worried me with Ray.
He wasn't as old, I think, in comparison. Or, no, wait, he was acting in the 30s, so I guess it could have been a similar age difference with Gary Cooper.
Yes.
And,
yes.
all due respect to Gary Cooper, probably he aged slightly more than Ray did.
Yeah, I think Ray and Gary Cooper were of the same age because they were in Beau Guest together back in the 1930s, which I really want to see Beau Guest. So they were of the same age. Ray, or thereabouts. Ray was a lot longer lived than, because he lived well into the 80s, and Gary died when he was 60. So in 1960 or so from a heart attack, I believe. So we'll move on to our second Gary film. So this one is one I said last week, or the last time we discussed movies together, that one that I wanted to see for many years because Anthony Perkins is in it, and that's Friendly Persuasion, 1956. Yep. Well, Matt, we'll just give the audience just a quick outline of the plot. So a Quaker family, so that's the Quakers, not indigenous to the North America. They're found all over the world, but it's sort of a religious movement with certain values and ideals. Not sort of as harsh maybe as the Amish community. There's the Mennonites, a few other sort of religious communities, and they all sort of seem to fit into a general area of some of the things that they do in their life that are probably different than what you and I would do. But a Quaker family lives and learns and tries to maintain their lifestyle mid the start of the Civil War. And that's really what the movie is. So I wasn't actually sure what I was watching. I was watching Friendly Persuasion because there's a lot of themes in the film, and there's a lot of, little like subplots and this and that, but no big massive storyline. And then at the end, a bunch of things happen, and then it is more of a moral story than a plot story. Would you agree with that, Matt? Or
yeah, I mean, honestly, I think probably the first third of the film, where it seemed to be more just a chance for William Wyler to do some of his Hollywood humor, it could have probably been there. A bit more tightly down. I think perhaps one thing, because a lot of people who may not be familiar with Quakerism, particularly outside of America, one of the big things about that religion is that they are harshly, like, hardcore pacifist, and I believe it goes so far as to say that a lot of governments, or at least in America, for a long time, and maybe now as well, are often given exemptions from war drafts. What's interesting is that Richard Nixon, the U.S. president, his family was Quaker, and he, if he wanted to, he could have gotten out of serving in World War II because he was a Quaker, but he chose to go. Now, whether that was for patriotic or future political reasons, he always had an agenda. But that's an interesting side note. But I think that's one of the core things, is that the Quakers are a very strong force for peace movements. And even though at the moment they only have like about 500,000 members, which when you compare to something like Catholicism, which has 1 billion, is not a lot. But they, from what I understand, because I've heard a couple speeches by historians in America, and their influence in a lot of international politics is far beyond their numbers.
Yes. So, that's a really interesting sort of information that you gave everyone. It's so basically that's the thrust of the film. So it was directed by a very well-known William Wyler. He was a Swiss German who came over, obviously, to be a part of the movie industry as well. He's known for Roman Holiday, as Matt said, Ben-Hur, so some massively successful films he was a part of. So, of course, starring Gary Cooper, Dorothy Maguire, who I liked in a film I saw when I was much younger, Gentleman's Agreement, with Gregory Peck. I always remembered her from that film and liked her. The great Anthony Perkins. And, oh, my God, Matt, I was sitting there. Yeah. The gentleman that was in the army, the guard, who was interested in the daughter in the film. I was like, where do I know that guy from? I'm like, oh, my God, it's Peter Mark Richmond from Santa Barbara. Yet another classic film actor who ended up in 80s soaps.
Yeah, your knowledge of 80s soaps astounds me. I mean,
I saw the face and I went, oh my God, is that Peter Mark Richmond? And it was. And he also was in Friday the 13th, Part 8, and was stuffed into a toxic bin by Jason Voorhees. I mean, what a way to finish off your career. I mean, I think actually, I want to say that Peter Mark Richmond is a very, very, very old man who's still with us, but I'm sure he must have.
Yeah.
Well, we will have to look that up. But the last time I checked, he was, but that was a while ago. But I was like, oh, this is hilarious. They were all, Anthony, that was his second film that he did after The Actress with Gene Simmons. And then pretty much after that, he moved away from the stage and started his quickly slow build up to Psycho, which really was not that many years later. It was 3 years later, I think.
Well, I've not seen many of Perkins' early roles before Psycho, but this does give an idea of the very homely character that he was associated with, and you can tell why Hitchcock, who liked casting against type, would have wanted someone like Perkins, who was perfect for a story that was kind of all about the sort of snap in the mind behind the exterior of the perfect American person.
Yeah, well, he sort of about that time he began his, he had very many different phases of his career. I mean, when you see the last set of films that he did and compare it to some of the classic movies, wow, we're talking some really 80s out there stuff. But he then did Tall Story with Jane Fonda. He did Tin Star. He did a few other films, and then we're getting up to Psycho. Then he still did them what would be considered classic films after Psycho, and then he got into the psychedelic stuff in the 70s. But it was really when he played Norman Bates again in Psycho 2 in 82, that's pretty much when his career went over into that side of, I'm playing the crazy guy in the film. And that was the end of it. But it was great to see him in this film, bringing it back to Friendly Persuasion. If anything, he wasn't in it enough for me. I liked Gary Cooper in this film. I thought he did a reasonable job with the material. The film was just, I get the thing, they're pacifists, and it's to fight or not to fight, because all of them, the father, the mother, and the Anthony Perkins character, they all have that decision to make. And in fact, they all kind of go against what the Quaker religion says to do. The mother beats the guy up when he touches the goose. She really goes for it. Anthony Perkins, their characters have their own, when the army approaches and everything, they get involved in. So that part was good.
Yeah, probably the best example of the noble pacifist is when Gary Cooper forces a gun off the Confederate soldier and tells him to go.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I haven't seen a greater act of mercy since Mr. Miyagi let the evil karate teacher go off.
Yeah. Is that in part 2 when he's about to, chop him at the window and stuff? Yeah.
I think it's sort of crossed over. I think they sort of recreate the same scene in the changeover or something. I haven't seen the Karate Kid in years.
Yeah. I think he does that at the start of part 2. So it's a direct continuation on from the first film. So they kind of merge together a little bit. But yes, I agree. I just, it was sort of interesting, the internal issues that the family had. The father loved music. He wanted to have an instrument. The mother was no, she was really, but then when push came to shove, when something that was important to her was being manhandled, she went for it. So in all their, own ways, they all had to grapple with that. So it's a nice moral story. And the ending part, which kind of comes a little bit out of nowhere, I sort of enjoyed. But just overall, it was maybe a little bit long for me, of course. And I just wish maybe something had started a bit earlier in the film to build it up a bit more.
It was kind of strange at the end because it's kind of ironic that you have this big war story and yet the whole major cast is still alive at the end.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I'm happy for them and all, but I'm kind of okay, I'm certain there's a film class teacher that's very disappointed with how they wrote the plot.
Yeah, it's sort of, but sometimes, it's sort of it's a hard thing to. There was obviously something they were going for in the film, and if you got it, you got it. If you didn't, then whereas High Noon, it was all about that high noon, So that was a big contrast in the films. One was a bit sort of meandering, and there was some life stories and lots of character tidbits and stuff, and then the other one was like High Noon, So it's two actually interesting films of his to compare because they were similar in some ways with the theme, but very different in the approach to the film. Both of the films were shot on movie ranches in California. Friendly Persuasion was set in Indiana, and the first film, High Noon, was set in New Mexico, but I suppose California can double for anywhere, especially back then when it was so not settled the way it is now. And
there
then
was one major difference I could pick up between both those films.
Yes, what was it?
Budget.
Yes.
Even the the aspect ratio of High Noon, it's like almost television screen size.
Yes, I knew you'd probably pick up on something like that.
Yeah, I was looking at it and I'm thinking, did they use a home movie camera or something?
Yeah. I think they have. I think I was reading, and I might put some articles up on our Facebook page about it, but that they said that was a few issues that film critics looking back on the film had with it. But I suppose a layperson like me, I probably wouldn't see that too much. But for someone like you that is a photographer and has a knowledge of cinematography and stuff, that's something that you pick up on straight away. But I did like the little...
that's a background...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying that's a background detail. I mean, it's like David O. Selznick said, a double-sized screen just makes a bad film twice as bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think either film was a bad or anything like that. Just things I really liked about both films, but on a whole, some elements didn't work for me, and that's probably why I'd give them sort of a maybe a B grade, just because there were a few elements in the films that were missed for me. Not necessarily anything bad.
I think Friendly Persuasion, a lot of people might have trouble relating to at certain points, just because it's come so far from the sort of high moral periods of the Victorian era when something like sitting on an armchair before dinner time was considered slovenly, and women meticulously kept doing crochet during every time because they regarded a moment of idleness as a chance for the devil to get into their mind, which was quite often a thing in a lot of the really strict Protestant communities in a lot of rural America. So a lot of the sort of moral conflicts that the plot alludes to, which probably many of the writers would have had clear memories in their head of older people they knew who were like that. But I think probably it's one of those extra layers of meaning that a lot of modern audiences might need to sort of practice and get into the headspace to understand fully.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still worthwhile watching Friendly Persuasion and High Noon if you're sort of interested in the country cowboy sort of genre, even things going into the spaghetti westerns and stuff.
Definitely. I'm just saying that film, it's we're like 2 decades into the 21st century now, and film has been around long enough that it's almost becoming like looking at different movements of art from the Renaissance or antiquities from Egypt, and you have to at times understand the culture that made it a lot better, whereas that wasn't necessarily thought of as much even up to maybe even just 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the nice little sort of story that I did hear about Friendly Persuasion, or when I was reading about the film, was that President Reagan gave the gift of the movie to President Gorbachev of the USSR to show that there can be peace through strength, which was a big motif of President Reagan. So I'm not sure. I understand
a lot of big Russian leaders like Stalin and stuff, they love their cowboy films.
Yes, well, yeah, this is true.
Even though High Noon is more about the martial. Although I do find it funny that in a lot of westerns that are supposed to be set around cowboys, and I'm thinking they never seem to actually get around to handling any cattle during the movie.
Yeah. Well, to sort of briefly go back to the 80s super soaps, that's why Alice was so successful, because it was set in Texas and they lived on this big ranch and everyone was wearing these hats and, and it was just something it's like a fantasy sort of scenario where they lived and how they played and what the cow, everything that was going on out there, and this sort of rich misery that they had. So that
we have that now. It's called The Bachelor.
Yeah. Oh, well, this one's been a fun one. It was good to finally see these two movies, and thanks for coming and chatting tonight, Matt. Much appreciated as always. And thank you also to anyone that listens to us. We are trying to sort of work on our production, and as soon as we physically can get together again, hopefully things will have a bit of an uptick there and we can bring you a better sounding product. So we're going to do, for our audience, just to let you know, for next week or the next discussion that we have on when movies were good, we're going to be doing a Burt Lancaster double. And I just sort of looking through some films today, and I suggested to Matt, maybe we can do some Burt Lancaster films. So we're going to do that for our next one. So we're going to do 1953's From Here to Eternity, and how I got that in my head was because now, make sure I don't get this wrong, he directed High Noon. So that's where, when I was researching Fred Zinnemann, who directed High Noon, I was like, From Here to Eternity, I've never seen it, I'd like to see it. Got a great cast, Montgomery Clift, someone Matt and I love, and some other very well-known people. So, I thought maybe that would be an interesting double to do. So there's just so many films we could choose. So it's almost trying to nail them down, which ones. So that should be a fun one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I haven't seen much of Burt Lancaster.
Neither have I. Always had seen him, the name, all the time. And, it was sort of like James Dean. I'd never actually sat down and physically watched a lot of his films, if any. So It should be a good one. And we thank you for joining us tonight. And Matt, do you want to just remind people the social media that we've got going on at the moment?
Yes, that's right. So as always, for our YouTube channel itself, you can hit subscribe and tap the bell to be notified of when our episodes are released. We bring out one every 2 weeks. We plan on having a pure audio stream as well, as soon as we can be physically together and we can actually make a audio track that's of a sufficient quality to be put as a pure audio stream. But until then, we're still here on YouTube, and you can also check out our pages on Instagram and Facebook, where we both introduce our episodes, but we also release extracurricular material now and then, which, if you're anything like us, you'll love reading late into the night.
Yeah, we definitely intend on putting more stuff like that. It's everyone's all over the place at the moment, but it's good to focus on things that you enjoy. So thanks everyone for checking in with us again this week. In the meantime, I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew.
And we're watching good movies, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys.